The first knock was polite, measured, the kind of knock that could have belonged to a neighbor. The second was firmer. The third shook the thin door in its frame. I stood in the center of the trailer, still as the dust motes drifting through the stale afternoon light. The air smelled like old wood, like boots left out in the rain, like a place that had been lived in too hard for too long. Another knock. A voice. A woman. "Alexander Moreno? We just need to talk." That was a lie. I could hear it in her tone. Too smooth, too patient. I had seen enough men and women like her, agents, rangers, bureaucrats with their stiff postures and clipped words, circling me like vultures long before they ever decided to sink their claws in. I was already moving before the next knock came. The back window stuck for half a second before giving way, and I dropped into the brittle grass behind the trailer. My boots hit the ground without a sound. I shouldered my pack, heart a steady drum in my chest. By the time they stepped inside, I was already in my car, which I was glad I had the foresight to pack my tent and a lot of supplies into. 15 minutes later, I pulled in a parking lot, not far from the tree line to the preserve. The scent of pine and damp earth wrapped around me like an embrace. The wind whistled through the branches, whispering secrets I had known since childhood. My father taught me how to move through this forest like a ghost. Step where the needles fall thickest, avoid the dry twigs. That knowledge still lived in my bones, guiding my steps as I pushed deeper into the wilderness. I didn't have to look back to know they wouldn't find me. The further I went, the more the noise of the world fell away. My thoughts tangled in the quiet. What now? There was no home to return to. My father had been dead for years, his absence settling into the trailer like a second ghost. The Ranger program, my last connection to something solid, had let me go. Though I was documented and had legal status, I was watched for too long, my presence in this country too precarious. It was only a matter of time before they found a reason to take everything. But they wouldn't take me. The path narrowed, curving into a dense thicket that only I knew how to navigate. The branches clawed at my sleeves, catching at my pack, as if testing me, but I didn't stop. Then, through the trees, I saw it, the ravine. It stretched before me like the edge of another world. The trees here were older, their roots gnarled and twisted into deep veins of earth. A hush settled over the air, different from the silence of the forest. This was something else, something alive. I stepped forward, heart slowing, breath evening out. I had always felt it, ever since I was a boy. The pulse beneath my feet, the way the shadows stretched just a little longer here, the way the wind never quite moved the same. The ravine had always been waiting for me, and now I was ready. The descent into the ravine was like slipping between worlds. The walls stretched high on either side, thick with roots that clung like veins to the earth, pulsing with a quiet, ancient rhythm. The air was heavier here, damp with the scent of moss and riverstone. I moved carefully, my boots skimming over the loose rock, each step drawn by an unseen pull. I wasn't afraid. I had been coming here since childhood, long before I knew what it truly was, before I understood that the ravine was not just a place, but a presence, watching, waiting, and when I was alone, it was the only thing that ever answered. He was waiting for me now. I saw him as soon as I broke through the thick underbrush at the bottom. A young man, barely older than me, standing where the roots of a massive aspen curled into the ground. He wasn't human, not in the way I was, not in the way I still was. I stopped a few feet away. Neither of us spoke. We never needed to. Our presence was its own language. Still, I felt the words clawing their way up my throat, thick with everything I'd carried with me since slipping through that trailer window. "They fired me," I said finally. I shook my head, forcing out a breath. I should have seen it coming. I think maybe I did, but I didn't think it would affect me, because I knew I did everything right. But I also know that doesn't matter to them. The ravine watched me, his expression unreadable. There were people looking for me today, I went on. A man and a woman. Probably ice. I don't know for sure, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I swallowed hard. If they take me, I have nowhere to go. My parents are gone. I haven't been in El Salvador since I was 2 years old. I don't know anyone there. My voice cracked. I don't even speak Spanish. The wind stirred through the trees, rustling the canopy high above. I looked at him, throat tight, hands clenched into fists at my sides. I just want to be happy, I said. I just want to be safe. For the first time, something like sorrow flickered across his face. His head tilted, gaze slipping past me to the walls of the ravine, to the trees that curled over the edges like watching sentinels. I don't want you to waste your life hiding, he murmured. His voice was like the wind through leaves, like water over stone. I don't care, I said. There's nothing for me out there anymore. A long silence stretched between us. Then the air shifted. A deep, shuddering breath rippled through the trees, a force moving unseen beneath the roots. The earth pulsed beneath my feet, slow and steady like a second heartbeat. A branch snapped in the distance. I turned. From the shadows they emerged. 6 black bears, their hulking bodies near silent as they moved over the forest floor. Their eyes gleamed in the dim light, reflecting something ancient and knowing. My pulse stammered, but I didn't move, didn't breathe as they came closer. The ravine stepped forward, unafraid, unshaken. He reached out a hand, pressing his palm to the head of the first bear. It exhaled slow and deep, then bowed. The others followed. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a display of power. It was a message. I was under his protection now. I built my camp the way the ravine told me to, hidden. The tent was small, wedged between the roots of an old pine where the canopy was thick enough to blur the sky. No smoke during the day, and only a small fire during the night. Nothing to give me away. Above, a bald eagle circled. I knew why it was there. The days blurred together, but I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to be anywhere, didn't have to explain myself, didn't have to wonder if someone was watching, waiting to pull me away from the only home I had ever known. The ravine had claimed me, and so had everything in it. Still, I felt it almost immediately. The shift. At first it was subtle. The wind carried more than just air. It carried voices, whispers in the trembling leaves. The river sang beneath its usual rush, a steady hum I could feel in my chest. I walked barefoot over the earth, and it was like pressing my skin to something alive, something breathing. The trees knew me, and then it wasn't just them. I stopped feeling hunger the way I used to. The ache in my stomach dulled, replaced by something else, a fullness that came from the air, the soil, the very act of being here. When I ran my hands over the bark of an aspen, I swore I felt something pass between us, a current, an unspoken recognition. My fingertips tingled, warm where they touched the wood. I wasn't afraid. I had always known, hadn't I? Even before I had the words for it, I had felt the pull, the way the ravine called to me, the way I belonged to it more than I ever had to the world above. The ravine watched me, silent as ever. I could feel his gaze, even when I wasn't looking, not wary, not unkind, just knowing. He didn't need to say it. He had seen this before. Then came the night it all changed. I woke with my hands in the dirt. For a moment, I didn't move. The earth was cool against my palms, damp from the evening rain. But something was wrong. My fingers felt strange, thicker, heavier. My breath caught. In the pale moonlight, I saw them. Thin, pale roots curled from my skin, stretching into the earth like they had always belonged there, like they had been waiting for me to stop fighting, to finally let go. I exhaled. My pulse should have been racing. My chest should have been tight with panic. But all I felt was certainty. It's happening. The thought wasn't frantic. It wasn't even a thought, not really. It was a truth, one I had known long before I ever stepped into this ravine. I pulled my hands free, watching the roots retract, slipping back beneath my skin like water sinking into soil. I stood stepping out into the night. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the stars very visible through the branches. The ravine was waiting. I didn't ask him if he had known. I didn't need to. I met his gaze. It's happening. He nodded. Yes. The changes were faster now. I could feel them in the marrow of my bones, in the pulse of the earth beneath my bare feet. The ravine was no longer just a place. It was inside me, weaving itself through my veins, filling the hollow spaces I hadn't even realized were empty. The hunger was gone. The exhaustion, the fear, the lingering ache of years spent trying to belong somewhere I was never meant to be. Gone. In its place was something new, something ancient. Strength, awareness. The wind carried voices I could finally understand. The trees leaned toward me like they were listening. When I walked through the brush, the leaves parted for me, knowing, recognizing. I reached out to touch a branch, and it curled toward my palm, seeking, responding. I didn't need to speak. Everything around me already knew, but the more I became a part of the ravine, the less I felt like myself. I crouched by the river, staring at my reflection in the black water. At first, it was the face I had always known, but then it shifted. For a fraction of a second, something else stared back, not human. The shape of me blurred, rippling like the water itself, something neither flesh nor shadow. I blinked, and the image was gone. I inhaled slowly. I knew what this meant. Behind me, the ravine stood silent, watching, waiting. It's almost time, he said. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I understood. He had been like me once. There was a final threshold, a choice that could still be made. The ravine's voice was calm, but there was something else in it too, something that felt like sadness. You can still leave. I turned toward the edge of the ravine, looking past the towering trees, past the wild expanse that stretched beyond. If I left now, I could walk back into town, find a way to survive, to scrape by in a world that had never wanted me. Maybe I could run far enough, hide well enough, start over again, but I already knew the truth. There was nothing left for me there. My father was gone. The home I had grown up in, emptied. The job that had given me purpose, taken. Even the body I had once lived in, changing, slipping further from the human shape I had worn my whole life. I had spent years trying to make myself small, trying to fit into a world that had no place for me. I wasn't going back. I turned away from the world I had once belonged to, stepping deeper into the wilderness. I was never meant to go back, I said. The ravine didn't speak, but I felt his presence beside me, a quiet understanding. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Somewhere above, the bald eagle cried out, circling lower. The trees rustled, whispering their approval. And when I took another step, the earth itself seemed to breathe with me. I let go. The moment I did, the change was not slow or gentle. It was instant, all-consuming, like a breath I had been holding my entire life finally exhaled. My body unraveled, but it didn't feel like breaking. It felt like becoming. The edges of me blurred, dissolving into light, into soil, into the rustling of leaves in the wind. I felt no fear, no pain, just warmth, vast and endless, like sunlight spilling through the canopy, like roots sinking deep into the embrace of the earth. The weight I had carried, the fear, the loneliness, the desperate longing to belong, was gone. I expanded. I felt the river carving its way through stone, the trees stretching toward the sky, the wild heartbeats of the creatures who call this place home. The wind wove itself through me, carrying the scent of rain and pine, and I knew, without doubt, that I was part of it now. I was the pulse of the ravine. I was the whisper of the leaves, the hush of the water, the steady drum of hooves and paws and talons moving through the wild. But I was still Alex. I opened my eyes. I no longer needed to breathe, but the sensation of air moving through me remained. I no longer needed to stand, but I felt the ground beneath me as if it had always been an extension of myself. I reached for my hands, but they were not hands anymore, not flesh, not bone, but something more, something ancient. And I was not alone. Beside me, the ravine stood as he always had, but for the first time, he was not singular. I turned to him, and he turned to me. Now, there were two. Time became something else. No longer a river I was rushing against. No longer days counted in hours or worries or waiting. It moved like the wind now, shifting, fluid, unbound. Seasons bled into each other, the green flush of summer fading into autumn's gold, into winter's hush, into spring's quiet rebirth. The world beyond the ravine continued as it always had, distant and unaware. The men and women who had searched for me, agents with sharp eyes and clipped voices, never found what they were looking for. They combed the woods, walked the edges of my old life, peered into places they thought I might hide, but they never truly saw. And when nothing came of their search, they left. Humans had a way of leaving. Yet sometimes one of them would find their way here. A hiker, a wanderer, a lost soul stepping onto ground they were never meant to find. Some only passed through, their footsteps light, their thoughts elsewhere. Others lingered at the edge, drawn by something they couldn't name. Few ever saw the truth. Fewer still understood. One afternoon, a man stopped at the ravine's edge, shifting the weight of his pack as he surveyed the valley below. His breath curled in the cold air. He didn't move for a long time. I watched him. He could not see me, not really, but he felt it, the weight of something ancient pressing against the air, the hush of the trees bending toward him, listening. His pulse quickened, though he didn't know why. Then, for the briefest of moments, the light shifted. His breath caught. Two figures in the trees, standing side by side, and then nothing. The wind carried a whisper through the branches, a voice that was not a voice. Go. The hiker hesitated, then turned, walking away with quickened steps, never knowing how close he had come to something beyond human, something that had once had a name. I watched until he was gone, until the forest settled again. The ravine stood beside me, as he always had. We did not speak. We did not need to. This was home. I was still alive, and I always will be.